Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a conversation with Professor Laurette Savoy on her book, Trace: Memory, History, Race, and the American Landscape. Laurette is the David B. Truman Professor of Environmental Studies at Mount Holyoke College. Her courses and writings explore the narratives we tell of the American land's origins and the narratives we tell of ourselves in this land, including the place of race. Winner of the Mount Holyoke College's Distinguished Teaching Award and an Andrew Carnegie Fellowship, Laurette has also held fellowships from the Smithsonian Institute and Yale University. She is a fellow of the Geological Society of America, is on the board of staff of the National Parks Conservation Association, and has served as the director of Mount Holyoke's Miller Worley Center for the Environment. BuzzFeed listed Professor Savoy as one of 11 women whose writing has changed the way the world sees itself. Trace is Laurette's most recent book, here we go, and was described by Terry Tempest Williams. I chose her because she gave a forum here last year, and she described it as a stunning excavation and revelation of race, identity, and the American landscape. I stand in awe of Laurette Savoy's wisdom and compassionate intelligence. Trace is a crucial book for our time, a bound sanity, not a forgiveness, but a reckoning. Trace has received outstanding accolades as the winner of the American Book Award from Before Columbus Foundation and the ASLE Environmental Creative Writing Award, finalist for the PEN American Book Award and the Phyllis Wheatley Book Award, as well as shortlisted for the William Saroyan International Prize for Writing and the Orion Book Award. It's a privilege for me to moderate tonight's forum. I'm Allison, the Deputy Director and Director of Engagement here at the Concord Museum, and I'm a proud alumna of Mount Holyoke and with a degree in environmental studies. So I am disappointed to say that I never had a chance to take a class from Laurette, as my time at Mount Holyoke happened to coincide with her having a Carnegie Fellowship to write this book. So she has an excuse, and I am now very grateful that we all have this book to share from it. So I'm willing to sacrifice that I didn't get to take a class. So we're grateful that we now can have these meaningful conversations from Trace. What Trace does so beautifully, and what Laurette in turn does every day as an educator, is illuminate Earth, historical, and personal processes in a way that connects and elevates each theme. And all of that, of course, leaves us with a lot to discuss in this 1 hour that we have together. So, Laurette, I hope you can get us started with an opportunity to get to know you a bit better. What led you to the book Trace? What questions were you trying to answer? I think you have a reading and presentation for us.
Well, thank you, Allison, and I too regret that we didn't have a chance to work with each other, but I knew you. We passed in the halls many times, and I'm really grateful to have been invited here. I'm grateful to be here. And before I get started, I have to give a little, is this a disclaimer or an admission? This is my second time in Concord. The first time was when I was either 11 or 12 years old. And I came with my mother. And as a child, history was a flame within me. It was a flame that drew me. I don't think quite like a moth, because I am still here. But we came because I needed to go to the historical park, and I needed to cross the river, because I had memorized, probably by the age of 9, by the rude bridge that arched the flood, the flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. And I wanted to know why. I wanted to see where, not just see it. I wanted to be there. And I wanted to touch that votive stone that was erected, that memory may our deed redeem when like our sires, our sons are gone. So we came, And I love the history. And I think we did come to this museum. And at 11 and 12 years old, I did not hear about the Nipmuc peoples who were here. I did not hear about the people who were free and enslaved before, even before the revolution, after the revolution. And I did not hear or see much about people who looked like me. And so to get to your question, Allison, I would say that Trace began in a childhood search to understand history, understand this land's history, the country's history, the history of the continent before there even was a United States. And it also was a struggle to come to terms with, if not answer, questions that have been with me since childhood, and perhaps they're questions that you might have asked when you were young. A question like this: if each of our lives is a single instant, what can we make of our place in the world, the latent image for that one instant we have? Like, imagine a camera shutter opening and closing, and that's our life. And then, over time and space, what do generations of instants mean? And so those questions and the child's struggle grew and became a mosaic of historical inquiry, but also journeys that crossed a continent as well as time, to explore how this nation's still unfolding history has marked the land and left marks on the land, has marked this society, but also has marked a person. And I'd like to show you some images so you could see where we went. So this journey took us from twisted terrain within the San Andreas Fault Zone in Southern California. And that lower image is showing a place called the Devil's Punch Bowl that's within the fault zone. Took us from there, or took me from there, to the north rim of the Grand Canyon, which I first visited at age 7. And that's a photo from that trip, to a place called Point Sublime, a very remote place on the north rim. And I'm the little one in the middle looking away. The journeys took me from a South Carolina plantation to an island in Lake Superior, one of the Apostle Islands, and the stories that were imposed on that land and appropriated from that land. That's an image of Schoolcraft and one of his books, one of his treatises documenting indigenous narratives, but appropriating them as well. And it took me to what is once called Indian Territory, as well as black towns in Oklahoma, like Boley. And these journeys took me from national parks to burial grounds, to the names that the American land wears, and the origins of these names. And the journeys also took me to the US-Mexico border, and this is in Arizona, and to the US Capitol, and considered the origins of both. That's it for the images for now. So in all these journeys and these inquiries that resulted in Trace, I would say tried to counter some of what have become the nation's most damaging public silences. And none of these silences, not a one, is coincidental. Too few appear in public history, yet they all touch us. And part of the work was to understand how they do. And if it's all right, I'd like to open or give a little bit of background to that by reading the prologue to the book. And because you live here and there's so many ponds around, I mean, kettle ponds galore and more, you know. But when I've read this in other places across the country, they think I'm nuts. But I know you'll understand. So these are thoughts on a frozen pond. In the dead of winter, I like to walk on water, held above liquid depths of the nearby pond by a vast frozen plain. This ice demands respect. I look again, listen again, attentive to any crack or yielding to my weight. When the surface is more solid than a hardwood dance floor and much thicker, I venture far. And even then, I hear the gloop, a distant blurp, a muffled gloosh, water undulating beneath ice and me. Sunlight appears to emanate from above and below on cloudless February days, raying through the crystalline lattice underfoot. With my eyes but inches from the surface, any sense of depth, of refracted distance, yields to a sense of motion arrested. Air bubbles halt in mid-ascent. White oak leaves descend as if on invisible steps, suspended for one season above the lake bottom. The recent past lies beneath me in these marcescent leaves, plucked and blown here by January's heavy winds. Inches away, they are out of reach. I kneel within the next stratum. Thoughts of time's passage always come to mind on such walks. Thoughts of how memory of any form becomes inscribed in the land. The hills surrounding this lake and my home are worn remains of long vanished mountains. Glacial debris from the last ice age produces a rock crop in my garden each and every spring. And stone walls that 2 centuries ago bordered fields and pastures now thread the dark heart of forests. Lauren Isley wrote in The Immense Journey that human beings are denied the dimension of time, so rooted are we in our particular now. We cannot in person step backward or forward from our circumscribed pinpoints. I cannot touch a leaf encased in ice. And I cannot feel the calloused hands that once stacked these walls. Yet we make our lives among the relics and ruins of former times and former worlds. And each of us is, too, a landscape inscribed by memory and by loss. I've long felt estranged from time and place, uncertain of where home lies. My skin, my eyes, my hair recall the blood of 3 continents as paths of ancestors, free and enslaved Africans, as well as colonists from Europe and peoples indigenous to this land, all converge in me. But I've known little of them or their paths to my present, though I've tracked long bygone moments on this continent from rocks and fossils, the remnants of deep time, the traces of a more intimate, recent lineal past have long seemed hidden and lost. Yet to live in this country is to be marked by its still unfolding history, life marks that are seen and unseen. From my circumscribed pinpoint, I must try to trace what has marked me. The way traverses many forms of memory and silence of a people as well as a single person. And because our lives take place among the shadows of unnumbered years, the journey crosses America and time. Come with me. We may find that home lies in remembering, in piecing together the fragments left, and in reconciling what it means to inhabit terrains of memory and to be one. Trace, noun, a way or path, a course of action, footprint or track, vestige of a former presence, an impression, minute amount, a life mark. Trace, verb, to make one's way, to pace or step, to travel through, to discern, to mark or draw, to follow tracks or footprints, to pursue, to discover.
Your writing is reverential. It's just reading it on a page is very powerful, but then hearing it in your voice is exceptional. So thank you for doing that reading.
No,
and
you're welcome. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
And we'll have a little more time. We'll do another reading a bit later. So in that similar vein, you're a geologist, and that's evident in the way that you talk about land and time in your book. But Trace definitely doesn't read like any geology papers that I came across at Mount Holyoke. It's a compliment. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about the relationship between the way you see as a geologist and cultural history. How does that influence your writing?
All right. I think the first thing I need to say is that I don't consider myself a geologist in the sense of a scientist who is primarily interested in doing primary geologic research. I have done that. I've done quite a bit of it. It's taken me to many different places. But what I see right now is how I can and do make use of the geologic background I have as a writer, as a questioner, a seeker, essentially what I described earlier. So I can say that part of what I do incorporates the science, geologic science, because it's an important way, or one of many important ways, to understand land. Because the history of human experience on this continent owes a great deal to the history of the land itself, to Earth. I mean, just think of the Appalachians, the region that we're in. But it also owes, the history of human experience owes a great deal to the land's texture, to its materials, to its structure. And I think that needs to be incorporated in consideration of human history and place. But what I try to do that I tried, and Trace is the first time in which I tried to piece it together in a book form, is to see how geology also offers metaphors of considering, if you can imagine, the deposition and erosion of human memory, or the fragmentation and displacement of human experience. And so in that way, geology can also offer a more literary pathway. I don't mean that in a highfalutin sense. I mean in a sense of trying to create narratives that recognize how our lives are bound to deep time and to earth in place. Our lives really do take place, and it's recognizing the depth and breadth of place in a large sense. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And so what excited you maybe about geology from a young age? You were a trained geologist. What made you fall in love with it?
Well, I think what excited me about geology was not recognizing what the frame in college or grad school of geology was. I found it more limiting than I thought geology was when I was a kid. And I think the passion, the interest began, and I know, Rick, you've heard this before, that I don't know, when you were 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, and you tried to understand who you were in this world about you. And by the age of 5, I had developed this self-theory, and we lived in Southern California at that point. And that theory was that sky flowed through my veins because I could see it. That's the sky in there. And that sun made my skin. It made my skin just as it made the dry California earth. And so I believed as a child, truly believed, that earth, sky, and I were kin. And at that age, if someone asked me what colored meant, I would have thought it meant that. But fast forward a little bit, my dad moves us to Washington, D.C., and at the age of 8, 7, 8, 9, but really 8 was the hard lesson. When I first experienced episodes of racism personally, and very harshly, and I'll perhaps read a little bit about that. But what I learned at that time was that only people hate. The earth doesn't hate. The sky doesn't hate. The waters don't hate. The plants don't hate. And so, of course, that's where I sought my solitude, my refuge. And not only that, because I began to realize that earth was a record of antiquity, that I sought refuge in deep time, a time preceding human hate. So those were the real reasons that I was initially drawn to geology. And after meandering through majors in studio art and history, I eventually picked geology because I thought a scientific understanding of Earth would then allow me to bring everything else in. And that's what I'm trying to do now.
That's a very good segue to my next question, actually. So I have the second edition of Trace, and you wrote a new preface for it. And you talk about the challenges of getting the book published and bringing it to publishers because it didn't fit neatly into any categories.
Right.
So you wrote, is it American history, memoir, nature writing, Black studies, women's studies, geology, earth science? And then you went on to say some boundaries need to be crossed. So why did you tackle Trace in this ambitious and expansive way, and how do you cross those boundaries?
Well, again, I think if childhood gives a lesson, I never liked to color within the lines because I thought beauty extended beyond edges. I think there are many ways that I could answer that, but I think a simple way to say it is that in some ways the boundaries that separate, let's say, disciplines or even writing genres, they're meant to be crossed, or at least the interstices, the edges between them, if you can imagine ecotones, but defined in a different way, to see where there's cross-fertilization, to see where there's conflict, to see just what can be gathered by looking at something through various lenses. I'd say one of the things that I've done in the book is anyone watch old movies, old westerns, or shows like Wagon Train or Bonanza or High Chaparral? I mean, the list could go on. I watched them all. So the ones that were not new in rerun form, the ones that were airing live or on TV then, I watched them. But imagine a wagon wheel, and imagine asking these questions, trying to understand the questions about what it means to live in this land, and what does it mean to be a responsible citizen in this land, and realizing that the answer can't come from one different place. So with this wagon wheel, if you can imagine around the perimeter, beginning at a point and trying to come to a center of understanding. And so each spoke of that wagon wheel is an attempt to understand. And so the original meaning, or the Latin, if you think of the word essay, to essay, the Latin root is to try, to attempt. And so the chapters, in a sense, are essays. They're not essays in the way they're defined today, but they're essays in an attempt to come to a point of understanding. And for me, geology and history and literature and art, they're all connected. So why would I want to separate them? So I think it's because I never liked to play by rules. Okay.
That's great.
Okay.
So I'd like to make a little time for you to give one more reading from the chapter, Alien Land Ethic, A Distance Between. Other chapters, like you said, are these essays, and Alien Land Ethic really does a wonderful job setting up the book and setting a framework, and it also tells a very deeply personal family history about your father and your own experiences. So it's something I think we'll all appreciate hearing.
Well, Allison, thank you. And for the excerpts that you were asking for, I thought that if I printed it out, I wouldn't be flipping through the book and fumbling with pages and oh, I meant to. So here it is all in one piece, this excerpt. It begins with a child memory, and then, as I noted before, with a child trying to understand and growing up and still trying to understand. So the first sentence is a view of a very young one. When I was a horse, a wild Appaloosa full of speed, I'd run fast. Up and down sidewalks, around our yard, around school playgrounds, just so I could feel the wind rush with me. But when the world moved beyond sense, I began to run from what I feared. Riots near our new home in Washington, D.C. left burnt, gutted remains of buildings I knew. The war overseas joined us at dinner each night as TV footage of wounded soldiers, of crying women and children, of places with names like Kaysan, My Lai, and assassinations of men my parents called good men, meant anyone, my parents, my friends, or I, could disappear at any time. So I learned at the age of 8 that hate could be spit dripping down the front of my favorite homemade dress. And one memory stays sharp. A gray morning on the school playground, a classmate sing-song. Never saw nothing as ugly as a nigger. Never saw nothing as crummy as a nigger. And his eyes were on me. So I then ran, not just to feel wind, but in hope it would blow away whatever it was about me that was bad and hate deserving. Safety lived in my room, in my mother's arms, and outdoors in nature that never judged or spat. I began to understand in teenage encounters with books by authors who also seemed to be seeking, and I met them question to question. My entering ninth grade class had to read 4 books over the summer. I don't remember the 4th one, but the other 3. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers, and A Sand County Almanac by Alda Leopold struck me deeply. I kept those books, returning to them again and again over the years. That Leopold's book was called Landmark, or a famous, almost holy book in environmental circles, I knew nothing about. What appealed to my young sensibilities were intimate images of land and seasons in place. The recycling odyssey of an atom through time. The chickadee, so small a bundle of large enthusiasms. The crane's call as the trumpet in the orchestra of evolution. What also appealed was the seeming openness of this man's struggle to frame a personal truth. Though I couldn't find words then, Leopold's call for an extension of ethics to Earth relations writ large seemed to express a sense of responsibility and reciprocity not yet embraced by this country, but embedded in many indigenous peoples' traditions of experience. The land ethic forced new questions. If, as Mr. Leopold wrote, and these are his words, obligations have no meaning without conscience, and the problem we face is the extension of the social conscience from people to land, unquote, then I wondered what part of this nation still lacked conscience broad enough to realize a change of mind and heart, to embrace what he called evolutionary possibility and ecological necessity. Or, put another way, why was it that in the United States I knew at age 14 human relations could be so cruel? What I wanted more than anything was to speak with Mr. Leopold, to ask him. Yet I so feared that the we and us in his book did not include me and other Americans with ancestral roots in Africa, in Asia, in indigenous America. Only uncertainty and estrangement seemed within my teenage reach. Another book, published in the same year as Leopold's, found me by accident in the basement stacks of my university library. I was 18. The author, Willard Savoy. The title, Alien Land. This was my father, dead already 2 years. This was a novel he never told me about, written long before he met my mother and well over a decade before my birth. It's a fictional account of an embittered boy becomes man who is of mixed heritage, with blue eyes and light-colored skin and hair, who wonders if he might escape racial prejudice and his own demons by redefining himself as white. The alien land came from what my father called, in his words, the hypocrisy which in one breath preached the doctrine that all men were created free and equal, and in the very next breath denied to millions the simple respect which should naturally go with such a belief. I stole the book, and I ran from it many times because of the closeness of experience, the closeness of hurt, humiliation, and shame. because of the closeness of questions. And I understood then, too, that I lived in an alien land. My questions as a 14-year-old became an 18-year-old's need to understand why such hypocrisy and inhumanity continued. A child born today enters a world of rapid and extensive environmental change. The list is often repeated. Ecosystems around the world have never before been so fragmented or degraded, resulting in great losses to the diversity of life. Fossil hydrocarbons literally fueled industrial revolutions and the mechanization of food production. And because of this fossil fuel economy, greenhouse gas levels have exceeded the highest atmospheric concentrations since our species evolved, making climate change an existential threat. The pace and degree of such environmental changes are unprecedented in human history. Yet the embedded systems and norms behind them in the United States, the most energy-consumptive nation, are not. Their deep roots allowed and continue to amplify fragmented ways of seeing, valuing, and using nature, as well as human beings. Alien land, land ethic. What is the distance between them? As a teenager, I felt removed from an integrity or wholeness of living because so much of my acquired knowledge came from inculcated divisions. Only slowly did I learn that I would remain complicit in my own diminishment unless I stepped out of the separate trap. You from me, us from them, brown skin from depigmented skin, relations among people from relations with the land, waters, atmosphere, biosphere. Another 9th grade summer text was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a survivor of Auschwitz and other Nazi camps who became a leading psychiatrist in post-war Europe. Frankl believed that, in his words, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Frankl added that, and again, these are his words, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way, and thus evoke his will to meaning from its state of latency. In the passing years, I began to doubt any emergence from a state of latency. I doubted whether Americans as a whole could choose to answer these questions broadly. What and whom do you love and respect? To what and whom are you responsible, obligated? These questions stayed with me, and they are questions I've heard many people asking and answering across the nation in recent years, months, days, weeks. What and whom do you love and respect? To what and whom are you responsible, obligated? Respect comes from the Latin for the willingness to look again and again with assumptions put aside. Responsibility is the ability to respond, the capacity to attend, to stand behind one's acts. And conscience comes from the Latin for a joint knowledge or feeling, to come to know together. I want to think that it's possible to refrain from disintegrated thinking and living, from a fragmented understanding of human experience, to imagine that a larger sense of who we all are as interconnected ecological, cultural, and historical beings could begin to grow. For if, as Aldo Leopold believed, the health of the land writ large is its capacity for self-renewal, then the health of the human family could in part be a cross-generational capacity for locating ourselves, all of us, within many inheritances, as citizens of the land, as citizens of nations, even within one nation, as citizens of earth, and thus within ever-widening communities. Questioned by life, we are held to account. Aldo Leopold and my father never met in their lifetimes, and I still hope that alien land and land ethic might meet in answer to each other in ours. That was the Reader's Digest condensed version.
So there's a tension in that chapter between the connections that your father and Aldo Leopold have as seekers. But then there's this strong feeling of exclusion that both you and your father feel in Aldo Leopold's definition of us. So I wonder if you can talk a bit more about that tension and particularly how it impacted you as a teenager coming to both of these writings for the first time. And then again, as writing Trace, how did you feel that tension as an adult?
I think it was just going back to what you noted earlier, it was a fear of exclusion. Without having a chance to speak with Aldo Leopold, I can't say. But it was a response to media images, what's on the news, television, movies, and also a response to the experiences. But I think one thing that your question just made me think of, and it's something that I haven't really spoken about, and maybe it's a partial answer, if I could say it. My father died at a time when, and perhaps you might, as an adolescent, have had a similar interaction with one or both of your parents. We were at odds. We didn't speak. And then he got cancer, he died, and I have always wanted and needed to imagine that we could talk together as adults. And of course, I never had that chance. But in college, I found the book, Alien Land, the novel. And years later, a little more than a decade ago, I found packed among my mother's things in the basement of the house, a box that my father had packed. You know, the size of boxes that have reams of Xerox paper, about so big, so wide, so heavy. I found it, and it had tape on it, yellow tape that he had handwritten. And it had not been opened since before he died. Probably hadn't been opened since 1970. So I opened it. And in that box, I found a man. I found a person I didn't know. I found journals in which he writes of his dreams to do this and that, which when I came along, he wasn't doing. When I came along, he was a very bitter, angry man who was silent most of the time. And he didn't write. And so in that box, I found contracts from his publisher. And Alien Land had been published by this huge, one of the big New York presses, E.P. Dutton. This was before the consolidations. And he was under contract for 2 more books. And that Alien Land had been published to some fanfare. And so I thought, well, there are 2 more books. I gotta find them. Look them up, catalogs. There's no other book. So I go through the book, the box even more, and I find these letters from Dutton canceling his contract. No more books. And it's because they had responded to the second manuscript, which I have been able to piece together from matchbook covers, notes on napkins, to type manuscript. It's not complete, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But they denied and rejected that book because he was writing about an artist of multiracial heritage, but who would have been in the mid-1950s, defined as Negro, who is trying to fight segregation in the nation's capital and is considering whether or not communism might be an answer. So I know why his contract was canceled, and my father found himself blacklisted. And I know this because of the Freedom of Information Act. I filed a request for his FBI, thinking, not knowing, I had no idea. But yeah, he had a file pretty thick. And I doubt that he knew why he was rejected again and again and again, because there were rejection notices from other publishers. And so fast forward 1960s, I come along and this man is not doing what he dreamed of doing. And I get choked up because I often wonder if it's possible that the unspoken hunger of a parent can grab a child and become a path for her to follow. So, didn't quite answer your question, but it's what came to mind.
No, thank you. Thank you. Running. So you describe the land, the map of the United States that you carry with you on your journeys, and yourself as palimpsests, the old texts that have been written over with new meaning. That idea is even present on the cover of the book. It's a palimpsest in of itself. So can you say a bit more about why that ties through?
Oh, it ties through with everything.
Yeah.
It ties through with our lives. So a palimpsest or palimpsest, depending on how people like to pronounce it, you can imagine it as a surface, like old parchment, that has been largely erased, or what is written there effaced, but not all of it. There are remnants, there are pieces, there are traces of what was there before. And so the American landscape is palimpsest. All you need to do is go outside, you find an outcrop. That is telling you a story of Earth, of the history of the land that made it millions of years ago, billions of years ago. It's telling the story of the formation of the Appalachians. You go to a city like New York City and go walk down Wall Street. Now, why is that called Wall Street? Imagine the wall that was there. You could go to any place, of course, here. Oh my gosh, driving into town, I got slowed down by traffic, which was a good thing because I looked around, I crossed the Concord River. I was so glad to do that. But seeing the burial grounds, we live among relics and ruins of former times, former worlds. And that is partly palimpsest. But palimpsest can be tangible, it can be what we see, but it can also be ideas, like the names on the land. They're palimpsest too. And so are we. We're texts that are written over, but what if what we were before is still here? So it's in some ways, Trace is revealing not just the nature of palimpsests, but what they are and how they touch on our lives, past to present. I hope that's an answer.
That's great.
Okay.
So one more question and we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So Trace, I would say, almost has two epilogues. There's the last chapter placing Washington, D.C. after the inauguration.
Oh, boy.
Brings us back to your father and your family history more broadly. And I think that leads into the work that you're currently doing. So I wonder if you wanted to talk about what's coming next.
What's coming next is Trace taken to a deeper level in one region. The chapters in the book Trace cross the continent. But while writing the book and since writing that book, I have learned about how deep my father's ancestors' roots extend into Chesapeake Earth, the region that became colonial Maryland, Virginia, and then where the nation's capital was sited. And these ancestors included colonists from England, Ireland, Scotland, as well as elsewhere in Europe. Of course, they included peoples from Africa, but also Madagascar, and not just West Africa. And these peoples from Africa were not all enslaved. And they include the diaspora of indigenous peoples who, once colonialism began, people who were removed, pushed off their land. And so I have recognized that the story of the history of that landscape, the geologic history as well as the human history, enfolds my father's peoples from the 1600s and before. And so what I'm trying to do is to use the lens of my search for these ancestors who are free people of color, of mixed heritage, 2 centuries before the Civil War, who are not citizens because they weren't allowed, yet they were trying to make their lives on their own terms. They were also the colonial settlers, many of whom, or some of whom, were enslavers, and they were as well some people enslaved. And all of them together made my father. And so what I am crafting is, I guess, a series of narratives of generations of Earth and the Earth changing of time to make the Chesapeake landscape that we see today, including the origin of the nation's capital. But it's also narratives of generations in the land. And that includes also recognizing that ideas of white, and to use the term of the time, Negro, that ideas of race and racism had some origins in that place too. And that depending on when an ancestor lived, a person of color of mixed heritage, they could have been white by law. But the one-drop rule was only passed in 1924. That's less than a century ago. And so it's understanding how ideas of place, ideas of people in place have come together to make this place today. But again, using the lens of my search for my father's people to show that this history is not remote, and it's certainly not gone or dead. It touches us. It touches us all intimately. And it certainly did make my father. So that's what it is. And my working title is Light and Shadow, because every person has light and shadow cast on them. Just thinking about that. And so a new piece will be coming out in Emergence magazine that touches on this in the next issue. And I'll keep you posted as the writing continues.
Please do. I think we have a couple of minutes if anyone has a question. And Lisa has a microphone to pass around.
Or just, oh, right, we're talking about,
Yeah, for the sake
Sorry.
of
Right.
those watching at home.
I'll start.
Please.
Bill, I was waiting for it.
Thanks so much for coming to Concord. I should have brought the map you gave. She was kind enough to give me a copy of the map she shows at our meetings, and I forgot to bring it. Textbooks and curriculum are kind of current in the social debate right now.
Yeah.
You're an unusually broadly read person who, as Allison started the conversation, described looking at problems from many different perspectives. I'd be curious what you would do if you were given a clean sheet of paper. And I'll pick on, say, middle school or grade school curriculum. What would you do in schools to help counteract the sorts of things that you've personally experienced and we've all observed and been part of? How would you change? What would you do that would be radically different in how we teach kids?
Is this typical of what a new teacher has to face? They get the exam, their oral exam is, oh my gosh, and I have no chance to prepare. What I would do, Bill, with a question like that, I think that, and thank you for asking it, I think the response that I give right now, as I'm driving back to Mount Holyoke, I'm going to think, oh, I should have said this, oh, I should have said that. So without having the chance to really let it simmer in, I always like to begin where people are, where the students are, and that includes with their home, with their place, and maybe this is even part of the school system here, to recognize that really understanding one's, and I'm going to use the word place again, but in a different sense, to understand one's place in the scheme of daily life, of familial life, of the life of a community, of the physical community or place, the landscape that is here. I would begin with where they are and try to, it would engage, of course, real and virtual field work, but just understanding what home is. And that's what I mean by beginning with place, beginning with home. And recognizing that understanding one's home is the first step, and honoring that home is the first step to understanding more. My gosh, how would you answer that? There, be put on the spot, the way you put other people on the spot. What would you do?
I'm not sure, but I was...
See, I could have said that.
You could, but as you know from other conversations, the images of you as a child that are depicted in the book were searing to me. And it just strikes me that if we don't find a way to change how we talk to young children and substitute something for what's obviously not there today, even today, I don't have an answer.
Well, thank you for admitting that. I think one thing, though, is thinking about the sense of we. I wish that we really did represent we the people, but I think so many people in this country, clearly not everyone, and hopefully not the majority, but there are some people who define we very narrowly with exclusion. And if there were some way that is not threatening but opening, enriching, to show that the range of people living in this country today is richness, not a threat, but how to do that. And I don't know if, I don't have answers for that. I have lots of ideas, but that would go far beyond the time we have right now. But it's a great question.
Speaking of, I think we are at the
Oh,
end
no.
of our time.
I'm sorry.
I'll leave us with closing words that your father wrote in the dedication of his book, written a decade before you
You
were
have
born.
that right there?
I have it.
Oh, gee.
To the child which my wife and I may someday have, and to the children of each American, in the fervent hope that at least one shall be brought to see more clearly the enduring need for simple humanity. Lorette, you're clearly fulfilling your father's hope and are continuing to do that work for your students, your readers, and us here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To you. To you.